Welcome back to Mean Streets, where each week we investigate the best, worst, and forgotten movies of film noir. I'm Luke Deckard.
And I'm Matthew Booth.
And today's case is 1981's Body Heat, starring William Hurt, Kathleen Turner, and Richard Crenna. I think it's Crenna. I'll go with Crenna. And it was written and directed by Lawrence Kasden. The log line for Body Heat is: during an extreme heat wave, a beautiful Florida woman and a seedy lawyer engage in an affair while plotting the murder of her rich husband. A plot we have seen 1,000,001 times. Body effing Heat. Matthew Booth, what's your reaction to Body Heat?
I saw this first when I was about 15 on TV late one night, and I've not seen it since until only a few months ago when I got it on Blu-ray. And it's an old favorite of mine. I like this film. I think this film is great fun. It's Double Indemnity with 1980s sex knobs on.
Yes. I've seen Double Indemnity, so I'm aware of that film, and I'm aware of that. So the connection was clear. The story is basically the same. I was underwhelmed by this movie, and okay, so you watched it when you were 15. Now this movie is just front loaded with a bunch of sex scenes, a bunch of nudity. A lot of Kathleen Turner's ass and tits and minge just all hanging out there.
Yeah,
all hanging out.
As is William Hurt.
Yeah, not as much as her though. Not as much as her.
No. This was the 80s though.
Yes. So I have to ask this: is there a part of you that, because you watched it at 15, which seems like a very unique year to watch a film like this, and I can see why it might be cemented as one of your all-time favorites because being 15 and what's in the movie. Do you think that had any impact on you, sir?
Might have done. Might have done. But you've got to bear in mind that I was a certain type of 15-year-old, because I was also a horrendous nerd. So once the murder plot kicked in, I sort of forgot all about that and was wrapped up in arson, murder, betrayal, and
fair enough
identity.
Fair enough.
But rewatching it, I say this is an old favorite of mine, and it is, but it's by no means perfect. And it's very much a product of its time, because rewatching it, as I say, it was only a couple of months ago. Maybe I got it on Blu-ray for Christmas, like last Christmas, just gone.
Right, yeah.
Those opening scenes between William Hurt and Kathleen Turner are really 80s, and they are very, very set in that period. And they're not really, you can't really transpose them to any other period in cinema, because it's all about the 80s there. The way she looks, the way she's dressed, the way that he acts.
Let's not jump into that too quickly. Let's tease the audience before we start diving in.
Well, unlike the film, you mean?
Yes.
There's no teasing in the film. It's straight in.
No, there really isn't. I thought it was interesting, just on a billing side, like the way the actors are billed. Crenna gets third billing, but he's in the movie for like 5 seconds. Whereas Ted Danson is in the movie a whole lot, and he's not in like the top billing, which is weird to me.
Well, Crenna was a bigger star than Ted Danson at this time.
Yeah,
I mean, this is pre-Cheers, isn't it? So maybe not by much, but it's pre-Cheers.
Yeah,
and Crenna had been going since, I think, like the mid 60s, early 60s. And funnily enough, Crenna, just on a tangent slightly, Crenna is in a TV remake of Double Indemnity playing Walter Neff.
Is he?
So there's a nice little sort of mirror image there.
Yes.
But yeah, Crenna was quite a big film and TV star. So
he was.
They'll have got a bit of mileage out of him, and I've no doubt his agent said we want sort of pretty high billing.
I mean, that was my vibe, because I was like, man, you are in this movie for about 5 minutes, very, very short amount of screen time, and there are other characters, particularly, I would have said Ted Danson is the third star of the movie, and
Definitely.
kind of being like fourth to fifth, maybe behind Preston. J.A. Preston. But yeah, it was just a weird one to me. It's like, yeah, you definitely have the star power to give yourself third billing and do almost no work.
I suspect that's entirely what it was. And just going on to Ted Danson, or going back to Ted Danson, by far my favorite performance in this film. It's absolutely hilarious.
Yes. There's a scene which I'll mention later that he sort of steals the scene, but he steals a lot of scenes. I think
he steals a lot of scenes. Yeah, and
Ted Danson is
great
one of my
line.
favorite actors.
Yeah, I love Ted Danson. Since Cheers, I've loved Ted Danson.
So there's a little bit of noir connection outside of the fact of film noir connection outside of the fact that this is a quite clear remake or reimagining of Double Indemnity. So it's produced by the Ladd Company, which also produced Blade Runner. And this company was owned by Alan Ladd Jr., who is the son of Alan Ladd, who's the star of The Glass Key, which we did recently-ish. But also to have more connections, the music's done by John Barry, who famously did the Bond movie amongst other things. And so there's a nice bit of noir connection going on. I think just general, it's clearly within the vein of neo noir. But it's one of the very early erotic thrillers, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, probably one of the first, I think.
Yeah. In the sense of like modern erotic thrillers, like that then become really popular in the 90s. Like, there would have been other erotic thrillers before this, but this one is sort of that.
Yeah, this is a forerunner to Basic Instinct and films like that. It's got as much in common with them as it has with Double Indemnity. It's sort of Double Indemnity written by whoever wrote Basic Instinct, and it's and films like, what's that awful Madonna one with Body of Evidence, films like that. It's very much of that ilk, but as neo-noir and erotic neo-noir goes, it's probably one of the first, I would say.
Yeah.
And it's very much it very much wears those credentials on its sleeve, I think.
It does. So the sucker cost $9 million to make, and its box office return was $24 million. So it was definitely a hit.
It was definitely a hit.
Definitely a hit.
And of course, that $9 million, it was taking a bit of a risk because the writer and director hadn't really done very well. I don't think he directed before for certain, but
well, let's get into that.
Quite
it's Lawrence Kasden. It's Lawrence Kasden. So he was really known for doing some script writing work on Raiders of the Lost Ark and Empire Strikes Back. Yeah. So he had some credentials in terms of screenwriting, but it's his directorial debut, I think. Yeah, it is.
But he had some big guns behind him because of Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Empire Strikes Back, because essentially George Lucas acted as a guarantor for this if he went over budget.
So Lucas, he went to the Ladd Company, didn't he? He was like, look, if he goes over, I'll front it, because Lucas had that much faith in Kasden.
In Kasden, yeah, which says a lot about both of them, I think, because certainly I think Kasdan's work on Raiders of the Lost Ark, he takes that basic idea of what Indiana Jones is and makes him a believable character in the confines of what that film is. And we've said before how much The Empire Strikes Back is the best of the Star Wars films for us both.
Yeah.
And Lee Brackett famously worked on that, but died quite early on. And I think you can see that Kasdan had something to do with it. I think he's good. I think he's a good screenwriter.
I think he's okay. I'm very reluctant a little bit, because other people worked on Raiders, other people worked on Empire. It's not just him and his imagination, whereas this is a lot of him, but he's stealing a lot from other things. Not stealing, but he's borrowing, and he's
borrowing heavily a lot
from other things. But I mean, even if I jump to like modern modern films of his. Like I absolutely hate The Force Awakens. I thought it was a shameless remake of A New Hope. So there's things I've never been blown away by Kasdan. I think he's been attached to good stuff. I think he's done some good stuff, but I'm always a bit reluctant when I'm like, there's other people involved. There's other people involved.
There's always other people involved, isn't there?
And when there are fewer people involved and he's involved and he's one of the top ones, it's not so good.
It's interesting that, this is a bit of a tangent, and I apologize, but Halloween 2, the 1981 Halloween 2's ostensibly directed by a man called Rick Rosenthal. He then goes to make one of the later Halloween films, and there's a world of difference between the two. He makes Halloween Resurrection, I think it is. And there has always been a rumor that John Carpenter was on set for Halloween 2. And you think, how much did Carpenter direct of Halloween 2 in 81? Because when you look at Rosenthal definitely on his own, there is a complete world of difference between these two films. So I reckon Carpenter had a lot of input in that. And it may be the same here, it may be. And Spielberg and Poltergeist, I mean, that's another, depends who you listen to, but that's another one where there is a school of thought that thinks Spielberg directed more of that than perhaps he's given, or had more input in that than he's given credit for. So there's always someone else involved in the behind the scenes in movie making. It's very collaborative.
Yeah, no, it is. It's interesting because he's quoted as saying that he wanted this film to have the intricate structure of a dream, the density of a good novel, and the texture of a recognizable people in extraordinary circumstances. It's a pretty heavy quote, and it's very sort of arty-farty, in my opinion.
Yeah, it is a bit.
I sort of get where he's coming from. The first bit, though, the intricate structure of a dream. Are dreams intricate? I mean, I guess thematically they might be. If you go Jungian with it.
Yeah. Depends how deep you want to go in this episode, Luke. We could talk about this for hours.
Exactly.
I think on that front, he's nowhere near someone like David Lynch for capturing what a dream is on screen.
Yeah.
He's nowhere near Lynch for that.
No, there was no dream quality to this movie. So that's why I found that quote very bizarre.
Yeah. I don't know if he means, the fact that it's all sort of, everyone's a bit sort of off their heads because it's so hot, or it's meant to be so hot, and there's this massive heat wave going through, and everyone's a bit sort of detached from themselves. But I don't. It's stretching a point. I think he's sort of overselling himself there. I sort of accept ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. But what was the other one? The texture of a novel.
Yes. The density of a novel.
Well, I don't think he's necessarily got the density of a novel. Perhaps a pretty good pulp novel, but
yeah, that just makes me think of like that George McFly quote in Back to the Future. My density has popped me to you. Like, you're just saying stuff here. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. This is just word salad, Lawrence. It don't mean anything. This. I don't think it's got the density of a novel, unless he just means one of the old churned out pulp novels of the 40s and 50s. It might approach that.
I get the impression that he's meaning like subtext, and this has no subtext to it.
No, this has got no subtext. This is just what happens on screen. This is all plot and sex, really. It's
basically a glorified porno. It's very thin on all other fronts, except for the sex.
I'll buy that for the opening. I'll buy that, but the sex dies off. There's there's a certain point comes in the film where it is all about the hoodwinking and the and the plot devices.
It gets there, but by the time it gets there, I was banging my head against the table waiting for this film to end, because I knew where it was going. This is the first time I've seen this movie, and I knew where it was going from the very beginning. I was like, all right, cool. But let's before we jump into that too much, let's round this off and chat casting, because one thing that I in Kasdan's favor that I liked, and this kind of other films have done this, but he was really adamant about casting unknowns for this for the leads, and I really appreciate that, because that adds a whole nother level of believability to certain films. I think, I mean, I always say this, like particularly with like superhero films and things like that. It's always great when these mega franchises or like Bond, when they cast someone who like is relatively not a massive star yet, because let that person make their fame from this role rather than just sort of
We've told the story before, but it's the Richard Donner thing with Superman. You know, if you put Robert Redford in that uniform, it's Robert Redford in tights. If you put Burt Reynolds in it, it's Burt Reynolds in tights. If you put an unknown in it, it's Superman.
Yeah. Funnily enough, Christopher Reeve was down for the role.
What a segue.
William Hurt. What a segue.
Yeah. Now that is disastrous casting in my view.
It would have been, and I think Reeves was right. Reeves turned down the role because he basically said that he didn't think he could be seedy enough. And I think he was right.
Yeah, I think he's right. And by this time, he's been Superman twice now, hasn't he? So no one's going to buy Superman as a seedy look. No one's going to buy Superman as Ned Rancine. No way. No way.
No.
And Reeve was absolutely right to turn this down. And he gives the right reason. He gives the right reason, because I don't think he was a brilliant actor, Christopher Reeve, and very much underrated. Superman got in the way a little bit, but I do not think he'd be convincing as a seedy lawyer. He looks too nice to get away with it, and I think it would have been very uncomfortable to see Christopher Reeve doing what William Hurt does in the opening 30 minutes of this film.
Yes. Whereas William Hurt's casting, I like the casting for everyone. I have no qualms with any of the casting. William Hurt was good. He has that very greasy 80s man look with this sort of balding but long hair, that kind of nasty mustache. But he's also very young, so he doesn't look like old and seedy. He just looks like young sleaze. You know?
He does look like young sleaze, and I like the fact that he's slightly he is going bald. There's no getting around that, you know. Yeah. And 80s fashion means he has to grow his hair long, and if anything, it emphasizes.
It's like my dad. He looked like my dad. Exactly what my dad looked like in the 80s. It was hilarious.
So when it's long on top, it does sort of tend to thin out if you've not got thick hair.
Yeah,
you know. But I quite like that, because the fact that he's not conventionally handsome. This is another problem I would have had with Christopher Reeve.
Yeah,
makes him all the better a patsy for when what happens eventually happens. You know, there's just something about him that means that this relationship is off from the start. You know, it's off kilter from the start, and it makes her more of an ice queen, that she's willing to do what she does with a man who doesn't look like Christopher Reeve.
True. Kathleen Turner, again, a very inspired piece of casting. Yeah. So this was her film debut, but at the time she was working on Broadway. And she struggled to get this part. She was rejected for the first audition because she didn't have any credits. But she, I guess, fought quite hard to get it, and she just felt that this was going to be her role. And in her defense, like, she does make this her role.
She does make this her role. And this might be hyperbole, but I think she makes this film. There's an argument to be made that she makes this film.
Yeah, I think so.
Because it's not an easy role, this. She's got to be really convincing, as not only as a vamp, but as a vulnerable woman. And like the girl in Out of the Past, she's got to do it at the drop of a hat when her wits tell her to do it. You know, we talked at great length about in Out of the Past about Kathy Moffat's ability to think on her feet, and to adapt to the situation that she now finds herself in. And there's a little bit of that in Matty Walker. Whether that's in the original script or whether that's Kathleen Turner's performance that brings that out, I wouldn't like to hazard a guess, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's the latter, because she is brilliant in this. She's electric in this.
You know, she really is. I mean, the other person this reminded me of was this particular character of Maddie really reminded me of Bridget Gregory from The Last Seduction. She's very much playing that role.
She's playing that role with the sort of Lauren Bacall overall quality. You know, the husky voice and all that.
Yeah, which was one of the main reasons why she got the role, because they were looking for Lawrence Kasden wanted someone who was based on modern day Bacall. and she sort of nailed that for him perfectly.
Yeah, and again, that's evidence of this film knowing where its inspirations are and where they lie, and perhaps relying on them just a tad too much. A tad too much, because it is obviously a Lauren Bacall reference. The film itself is obviously a Double Indemnity reference, and there's just a little bit of pandering, perhaps, to those films that have gone before.
I mean,
but having said that, I think Turner does something of her own with it. I think it's not a direct sort of impersonation of all those that have gone before. She does do something with it herself.
Yeah,
she has a quality of her own.
She does. I mean, it's funny because like I really didn't find the overall story that good. I found her acting good and compelling. I found most the acting generally is fine and works, but the overall story just wasn't working for me. And there was this part halfway through where I was like, man, I feel like when they went to make The Last Seduction, they just sort of looked at this film and thought, how can we do this but better? And have a sexy, sexed up movie that is ruining men's lives, and this femme fatale is a massive man eater, and she's getting away with it. And how can we do that better? And I feel like The Last Seduction looks at this film and triumphs. Which is rich saying that, because obviously this film is a massive success. People love this film. I don't understand why it's as praised as it is. Maybe you had to be there at the time. I'm not.
I think that's an element of it. Yeah. I genuinely think that's an element of it. This film, if they made it now, it would just be a cheap, sleazy thriller. And I think that's part of the problem that Last Seduction had, that it was just treated like that.
Yes,
because it was on the back of inferior films, or mixed in with inferior films like that Madonna one. So, and a lot of opinion, and in a short space of time, we're only talking we're talking 10, 12 years or something between the two films.
What, between this? No, ages. Like 15 years.
Was it? Oh, it was 96.
This is 81, and Last Seduction was like 1995.
Was it 95? Yeah, so it's 14 years. So, times have changed, obviously, in that time. But this was massive, and I think Hollywood does this, doesn't it? You have an erotic thriller that's a success, so then you get an abundance of them, and a lot of it is right place at the right time. And I do wonder if this film was in the right place at the right time. And I think that if you were there as well, or not long after it, which is me, as a 15-year-old me, you've not seen all those other films that by the time you come to watch it for the first time in 2024, you have. You know what I mean? So at this time, people might not have seen anything quite like this, whereas now we've seen too many of them.
Yeah.
And of course, I think, people do learn from what's gone before. So if this is a bit creaky now, by the time they make The Last Seduction, you're right, they can say, well, what didn't work on that, looking back on it, and we'll fix it. I think there's definitely a nostalgia thing on this for me, and I'm not going to lie about it. But yeah, I can sort of go along with the fact that The Last Seduction does the same, a similar idea for Kathleen Turner's character, but sharpens it and hones it and makes it even more lethal, shall we say?
Definitely. The last thing on casting that was interesting is I love Ted Danson in the role of Peter. I think he's one of the
fabulous.
He's one of the he is. He's one of the ones that just pops on screen the most. There's just something about Ted Danson. He pops on screen. I think him and Kathleen Turner both they are quite electric on screen. Even though Ted has a very small role in this movie, or a smaller role, when he's on screen, like there's a scene after that scene in the boardroom where they're talking, where Ned is walking what's her name, Maddie, and Ned is walking Maddie back to her car, and you can see Ted Danson's character dancing off in the distance,
dancing in the background.
And it's like he is stealing the shot, like he's stealing the show, but he's like, I don't know, several yards away,
and he arrives in the film quite early on in pretty much the opening. Is it the second scene or something? I think it is. and he's fully formed. You know exactly what it is that he's doing and who he is and who Lowenstein is, just from a few one-liners that Ted Danson has and the exuberance of his performance. He's always smiling. He's always sort of cracking a joke, even when he's cornering William Hurt's character. Yeah. He's still cracking jokes, about the man that Matty has been seen with by Matty's stepdaughter, and it's just a great performance. It's a great comic performance that, when it needs to be, is very serious. And that, a bit like Columbo for a lazy comparison, that Lowenstein's got a razor sharp mind, but disguises it with dancing and quips and acting like an idiot,
Yeah. I think what's also really cool about this movie is the way that it was, how Kasdan approached the editing of the movie. So he hired a woman named Carol Littleton to edit it, and he did that because basically he wanted to have a woman's perspective on the erotic nature. So when because there's a lot of sex scenes, there's a lot of orgasm scenes, there's a lot of just full on nudity going on, and I do like the fact that Kasdan had that wisdom to say, okay, well, let's I've written this movie, I'm gonna direct this movie, here we go. But I think when it comes to the visual, like putting it together, I think it really needs a female eye to make sure that it's not too leery and
and exploitative.
And I do think that they accomplished that pretty well throughout this. So I do have to give the film credit for that.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it was a sensible decision to make, to have a woman editor involved in it, because it could so easily fall into sleazy exploitation. And I mean, it runs very close to it. Yeah, it's a very, very sexually charged opening to this film. The first act really is very sexually charged, and then it still ripples through the remaining two acts. But as I say, for me, it does sort of tend to go into the background a little bit. But I think the way that she does edit it and the way that it's all put together you do get the sense very strongly, I think, that Matty is using her sexuality to prey on people rather than being taken advantage of because she's so good looking and so sexy.
Yeah.
And and William Hurt's character, Ned, he thinks that he's the player here, and he thinks that he's God's gift, doesn't he? And somehow he manages to get loads of people. God knows why. But
it's the 80s, so he's a lawyer in a small town.
He's a lawyer in a small town. Maybe that's it. American small town lawyers. Maybe they're a breed I don't know too much about. But yeah, he thinks he's in charge of this situation all the way through because he's the one that's doing the seducing, and of course it's not. It's her. And there is a great conversation between the two of them where he says, maybe you shouldn't dress like that. They're in a bar and everyone's looking at her, and he says, maybe you shouldn't dress like that. And she's dressed
very, very conservative in that scene. I found that line a little bit stupid because she's not dressed in a sexy way whatsoever.
No, and she says it's a blouse and a skirt. What's your point?
Yeah.
I mean, it's unbuttoned, I suppose. It's unbuttoned a bit low, I suppose, but it is hot, but it is just a blouse and a skirt. So, but yeah, I think that if a male editor had dealt with this, it would have been too easy to make it sleazy.
It would have been V.I. Wostarski.
Well, it would. We'd have had far too many close-ups of Kathleen Turner everywhere, all over.
Yes,
and not enough close-ups of William Hurt, if that's not too odd a thing to say. Because he does bear all in this. The rumor is that they greeted the cast both naked so that there'd be no embarrassment on the set.
Yeah, I also find that story just so pretentious. I'm sorry, I heard that and I was like, wait, okay, so you dropped your shorts and went and that. If someone did that to me, I'd be like, what the F are you doing? Put something on.
Well,
I'll bear it when I have to.
Yeah, get away from me. I don't want to see more than I have to.
No. I just found that just weird.
I find that's all a very sort of method acting type of rubbish. I
Yeah.
can't be doing with
It's
any
like,
of
you
that
did
sort
not
of
make me
stuff.
feel comfortable. You made me feel very uncomfortable. That wouldn't happen. That probably wouldn't happen in 2024. I'm just
Can you imagine? My God. Twitter would explode.
I know, right? So I've been a bit harsh on the movie so far. There are things that I liked about it. There's a lot of visual stuff that I liked. So there's, the film is set during a heat wave. I like that. You can really feel every scene I was watching felt uncomfortable in a good way. In that it's hot and it feels sticky, and every room feels tight and close together. And the diner that they're in, that boardroom that they're in, is when they're smoking, the smoke just collates everywhere. Like you're cutting through smoke when you're walking. That the bar that he, that Ned meets Maddie in, where you just mentioned, where she's wearing that blouse and a skirt. That felt very dark and dingy, but hot and sticky, and the blacks are black and there's this red neon glow. Like, there's a really good visual style to the movie that I do really appreciate. And it's also sort of reflected in the cast as well. So you were mentioning the first image that we get of Maddie, and Ned is walking somewhere and there's a concert going on in the distance, and she just stands up and walks up the aisle and walks past him, and he catches her and awkwardly follows her and starts chatting her up. But the first thing I noticed was that she's wearing white.
Yeah.
And it's like it's this symbol. I mean, white is a symbol of purity, isn't it? So you see her, and you see her all dressed in white, and it's this. I did like that play of like, okay, well, this is the femme fatale. This is the woman he's going to fall in love with. This is the the catalyst, and she's presented in this way, but she is anything but pure. And it's not just her relationship with Ned that is the thing that makes things unpure. It's she has been this way her whole life.
Yeah.
And I like that. I did like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to the film, the editing, avoiding it being too exploitative. She gets I don't know, what is it, like a cherry flavored ice drink thing, like a slush puppy, I suppose.
Yeah.
And she puts it on herself, doesn't she? She puts it on her throat to cool herself down. Well, that if that had been, if this had been the team behind V.I. Wachowski, would have got a full-on close-up of that. But it doesn't feel. It could look erotic, that, but it doesn't feel grossly erotic. It doesn't feel over-erotic, that. But William Hurt's character, Ned, definitely is sort of turned on by it. He's loving every minute of it. And so it's another indicator that she knows what she's doing. And she knows how to play him from the minute he walks up to her, because his chat-up lines are pretty useless.
Yes,
he looks pretty useless. And she'll have been well, she says later on she's been chatted up by so many people in that bar that she knows the inferences. She knows good from bad, and she knows someone she can play very, very quickly. And all that's going on under the surface of that particular scene. But yeah, it's so obvious that she's the femme fatale, and it's so obvious that, because Kathleen Turner's got a look about her, she's got that sort of raised eyebrow that makes you think, this is trouble. There's trouble coming here. But she is in this virginal white blouse, and it is a nice little contrast to what you normally get,
Yeah. I think what annoyed me about the fact that she was so obviously going to be evil was two very big things. One was the film did very, very little to make me believe her husband, Edmund, was a really bad guy. Off camera, he's a bad guy, they say. But we don't ever see him do anything that implies he's bad or she wants to get away from, even if she's trying to make it up to, convince Ned to help her. Like, does she give herself a black eye? Does she do something? Does she do something to sort of, play with Ned's emotions, even if Edmund isn't actually doing those things. They're just, that annoyed me for one, because there's, he's barely in the movie. When he comes into town, it's like a sweeping visit, and he's a really nice guy in those scenes. And so I'm like, okay, well then she's clearly, either we're gonna something's have to be revealed soon, or she's just a bad person, and this is just what she's doing. And then, of course, he found out she is just a bad person. But the other big, glaring thing was the will. The fact that she did that with the will. I'm like, okay. It's really obvious now, movie. Like, the twist, there is no twist now. Like, we're like, there's an hour left of the movie, but we know. we know. So,
yeah.
It could have been, I feel like her character could have been handled better. And this is what's sort of frustrating, is that so much time, that first sort of hour of the movie is all dedicated to them just banging, and so much banging that it's like, well, you could have cut some of this banging and developed your characters.
Certainly. They certainly could have done that. But Ned does say at one point, a man's going to die only because we want it to happen. So I don't think he's necessarily needs to be duped, as it were, into thinking he's saving her. I think they're both sort of unpleasant enough to say they just want the sex and the money. But
yeah, I even found that turn bugged me, because I'm like, okay, Ned, you're sleazy, you sleep with a bunch of women, yeah, you're interested in money, but like, this is why these plots really annoy me, because you really have to sell me on this relationship.
Yeah,
and this doesn't work for me. I don't care how hot she is. I don't care how much time she's sucking him off.
No,
like, I'm not buying that just because he's banging her every once in a while and they're having this love affair behind the scenes, that he's now willing to murder. I just didn't buy it. Didn't buy it at all.
There's another problem with that, which is that when it's very difficult to have any sympathy for Ned.
Yeah. God,
when
no.
the truth comes out, because he's not. You sort of think, well, that's because you were thinking with your pants and not your brain. And your brain isn't very good anyway, because he's obviously a terrible lawyer.
Yes,
it takes the judge in the opening sort of court case to tell him, "Don't ever come into my courtroom again without a case."
Yeah.
So
yes.
he's on, and of course it becomes a plot point that he's made a mess of an inheritance case, or a will case. It becomes a plot point. So yeah, Ned is very difficult to convince you that you should feel sorry for him when his plight is eventually revealed. Whereas I don't feel that so strongly with Walter Neff in Double Indemnity. I think he is an honest man whose head is turned.
Yes,
and she does, from memory, she does spin him a yarn about.
I think so.
Friedrichsen or Dietrichson, whatever he's called.
Dietrichson, yes. Yeah,
Dietrichson.
Yeah.
I think she does spin him a yarn, which he never bothers to actually see if it's true. He never investigates whether it's true, because he's so taken by it.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ned doesn't have that gullibility. He's just constantly randy. That's his tragic flaw, is that he's constantly horny.
Yes.
Which is a bit less. For me, is a bit less easy to forgive than being gullible and just an honest bloke wrapped up by a dangerous woman.
And I think if they could have offset some of this stuff with the other characters, that might have been helpful. So, I like Ted Danson, but again, aside from him just dancing and smiling, there's nothing to his character. He is very, very thinly drawn, and even more thinly drawn is J.A. Preston's character of Oscar, the guy
Oscar
who's basically solving the case. Like, he just turns up in one scene at the diner, and then he's just kind of there the rest of the time. I'm like, wait, who are you, and why are you? How are you? What's going on? Okay, now you're solving this case, and you're on to Ned and his and Maddie's murder plot and stuff, but we're not getting any time with you. Like, you're not a character.
No, and by the time he turns up at the hotel to find out, to inquire about the phone calls made to Ned's room,
yes,
where they find out that he wasn't actually there. I'd forgotten who he was, to be quite honest.
Easy to do.
And I thought, and if it weren't for the fact that he's played by the bloke who plays the judge in A Few Good Men, amongst other things.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I love A Few Good Men. Jeez.
I'd be thinking, who's this? And I do think, who's this? And I thought, it's him. He was always with Ted Danson. He's Ted Danson's sidekick.
Yes.
Because until I watched it in readiness for this, I thought they were both sort of district attorney people. But no, he's a cop, isn't he? He's a proper cop.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is a problem with that, and what these stories need, in order to succeed, what they have to have for me is that central relationship between Patsy and Femme Fatale has got to be watertight, and it's got to be it doesn't matter if the characters around them then are thinly drawn, if they are absolutely compelling.
Yeah.
And that is a problem with this, that, looking at it with a 35-year older brain than 15, there's not enough to them. There's not enough to them to make that work. So you need the others to then be more fully drawn so that they become the sort of cartoon characters, essentially. And then you're in trouble then.
I think the first sign of problems for me was very early on, when it's right after that scene that I really do like, that the opening of the movie all the way through Ned's sort of hunt to find Maddie and finds her at that bar. And then they go to her house, and that's when it all falls apart for me. And it falls apart because she's clearly invited him there as a tease. That's still fine. She lets him inside. That's still fine. She tells him to leave. Still fine. I'm still on board. And then he just becomes, he goes outside. She shuts the door. And then he just becomes a raging animal. Like a baboon who's just furious to get inside to get his rocks off, and he's roaming from window to window, and she's just standing there watching him, but like as in like in an inviting way. It's almost like you're watching some sort of like, I would love for someone to do a nature documentary style of this scene with a David Attenborough
voiceover.
Yeah. Like that would just be the best thing, because he's jumping from window to window looking in, and then his solution is to pick up a lawn chair and throw it through like a glass door or glass window or whatever. And then they just go inside and they start banging.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wait a minute. How is she going to explain this broken door? Who's going to pay? I was just going to say, like, yeah, like, I get it. You're letting passions take over, blah, blah. But like, why didn't she just open the door?
Well, why doesn't she just? Because it is obvious that there's a reason she's taking him back, and we all know what it is. Don't you know? It's
she's playing him, because if she's playing him, why not just open the door?
Yeah, and it would have been much more interesting if he says, "Well, I'm not having this," and walks off, gets back in his car, and she comes running after him, or she opens the door then to invite, because he's called a bluff. That would have been a bit more interesting.
Yeah, he shuts his car door and sees the front door is open now.
Yeah. So then he gets out,
perfect,
and he not necessarily charges, but he marches towards leaving the car door open, because he's not thinking about the car door anymore.
Yeah.
So there is an element of that, and it is very obviously, we've got to demonstrate that that there is passion simmering under these two, but there are better ways of doing it than him becoming a baboon. I can't think of a better way of saying it.
It's like he just reminded me of like either like a raging like frustrated lion in a cage, or a frustrated like gorilla in a zoo who's just like like that's all I can think of when I saw it. I just thought, why? Because again, it's like, if I need to buy that he's falling madly in love with her, it needs to go deeper than just the carnal. And that's all they have, is just the carnal. And so I'm like, wait, you are willing to murder her husband just for this? At the moment, you just have a fleeting carnal romance. You don't have like, and if he's meant to be seduced by that, then she should be seducing him better than locking him out of the house and making him break in, because it's sort of R-wordy. It was sort of R-wordy. sort of
Yeah.
rappy. We'll say rappy. You know.
Yeah. It was definitely. It was, but in unpleasantly encouraged rappy.
Yes.
That is a bit. Don't like that.
Yes.
Very much. And yeah, it's an oddly sort of flat scene. Is that for one that is so important? And it is true to say that their motive is purely lust and money. And Ned's been set up as this man who goes from woman to woman. Is she a waitress or something that he's with in the opening scene?
Mm-hmm.
And she says, "Oh yeah, you're done with me. You've got your rocks off. Essentially, you've satisfied yourself, and you'll just move on to the next one."
Mm.
Well, why is Matty any different?
Exactly.
Why is Matty any different? Why does he not just say, "Well, that was great fun, thanks very much," and then drive back to his apartment?
Yep.
And they don't really explain why she's different, other than, well, she's Kathleen Turner and she looks the way she does.
Yes.
But then when Mary Ann turns up, who is also a very good-looking woman,
mm-hmm.
why is Ned not then like on to the next prize?
Yeah.
Because between the two of them, he could have a really good time if that's what he's interested in.
I kind of wondered if that was where this movie was going to go at that point, but it didn't. I was like, all right, damn it.
But and the answer to that, the plot answer to that is because he's fallen in love with her, but we don't see that happen. Beyond a few lines, like she says something pretty crass about, "I've never wanted it like this before," and he says, "Give me a minute, it takes time to recuperate," sort of thing.
Yes.
And then she says, I think she says she loves him at one point, and but it's just dialogue. It's just dialogue.
Yes. Yeah.
It's just words that are being said.
Yeah.
So either we're meant to think that Ned is so horny that he goes from one girl to the next without thinking about them, but he's at the same time stupid enough to get stuck on one girl because she says she loves him.
Mm.
Either way, difficult to feel sorry for him when he ends up where he does.
Yeah. I looking back, I really feel that this film is one of those style over substance movies where it's remembered for its style because it's evocative and looks good and has a gorgeous woman naked half the time. But if you look at it critically, this like the murder plan, what the F was the murder plan? I don't even know what it was, because at one point Ned's like, "The next time you see me, your husband will be dead." But then the next time we see him, he's sneaking into her house and they're in bed. Her husband, Maddie and Edmund are in bed together. And I'm like, wait, so your plan was to kill him in the house? You weren't going to try and get him out of the house somewhere else? Like, what? And then she was just going to stay in bed while he murdered him downstairs. But then she's involved because obviously Edmund has the gun and she goes to warn him that he has a gun. But then why say, next time you see me, your husband will be dead?
Yeah, I've never understood that line. I've never understood that line. And if we're going to kill him in the house, why do we have to get to Mickey Rourke to set up an arson plot? Because I've always taken it, the idea is to kill him and make it look like an arson, in that warehouse, whatever it is, on the beach.
Yeah.
And make it look as if it was like an insurance job almost, that it's gone wrong.
Yes.
That you're setting fire to it and he dies in the fire. And I can sort of imagine if he's just going to knock him out and take him there, then fair enough. Because then he's going to die in the fire. And if he's got a head wound, they're going to say something's fallen on his head.
Yes.
And he's passed out in the fire and burnt to death.
Yeah.
So I think that's the murder plot, and it goes wrong because Richard Crenna fights back. But every time I watch it, I do think to myself, now what would happen if you were writing this and you had one of those writer moments where you say, hang on, what happens if Richard Crenna kills William Hurt right now?
I almost thought that might happen.
Where does my story go then? And we're both writers. You'd sit back then and say, I need to rethink my plot maybe. And I'd have an agonizing few days of whether or not that was a better story than the one I'd already plotted out.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, and I do get that sense of I sort of wish you got killed here, Ned.
Same.
Because you're completely incompetent at everything. So
it would have been a good
Crenna's
psycho moment if Ned dies in that moment, and then the rest of the movie is Maddie trying to get rid of her husband without the help of
without Ned. Yeah.
I would have maybe liked this a lot more, because that would have been a twist that I wouldn't have fully expected and probably enjoyed more, because it did run through my head when they started to fight, and I thought, oh, maybe he's going to kill Ned. That'll be cool. Let's see how that plays out. And then it's just like, oh, okay.
It'd be one of those twists, wouldn't it, where you say, is he going to kill Ned? Is he? Is it?
Yeah.
God, he has. My God, he has.
Yes.
So you might see it coming, but when it does happen, you'd still be satisfied. And as it is, for a film that's in the 80s, early 80s, when they weren't shy of showing violence, you don't see Richard Crenna get killed. In fact, I think there's a TV version of this where you don't see the murder at all.
Oh, is there?
I think so. So. So, that must be really irritating.
It's gotta be. That's gotta be. There's also
gearing up to this death, and you don't see it.
That would be. I'd be annoyed if I was watching on TV and that's what I got. Now, remind me, because I'm having trouble if I'm just misremembering or not. But there's this? Obviously, his glasses aren't on. Edmund's glasses are on his face when he dies, and that becomes a big plot point, and why they think it's a murder, not whatever, arson gone wrong. Maddie keeps talking about the cleaner. I don't remember seeing a cleaner in the movie.
No, I don't think there is one. Maddie's taking the glasses.
And this is another point that's what I was thinking. That's what annoyed me, because I kept thinking there would be a cleaner, because who is cleaning this house? You're telling me that Kathleen Turner is cleaning this house? No. This is a mansion. You would have a cleaner. You're not doing everything yourself. Yeah,
that is a plot hole. That is a plot hole.
You would have gardeners. It's a bit like Chinatown. They have servants, they have help, they have people gardening, tending to the garden. This is a massive house with a boathouse. Like, you would have staff.
And the whole point is that Richard Crenna, Edmund, is loaded because she wants the cash.
Yes.
So he can afford it. That is a serious plot hole. That is a serious plot hole.
And I guess as well, I kept thinking, like, well, is he restricting her money? Like, if we'd seen him do that, I would also understand why she wants him dead. But we don't even see Edmund restrict money for Maddie. And so I'm like,
no. Her motive is greed. Her motive is pure greed.
Yeah.
And we learn later that that's always been the plan.
Yes.
To be rich.
But she is rich. So what is she lacking now?
Yeah, exactly. Why does she? Well, she wants it all for herself. That's the great. She wants it all for herself. Because Ned says later on she'd have to share it with two people. Once she got it, she'd have to share it with two people, and she wouldn't have that. So she wants it for herself. But I mean, that's a pretty basic motive, isn't it? That's a pretty basic reason to kill somebody. But the glasses are an issue for me. The glasses really are an issue for me, and their only purpose is to give physical evidence against Ned, as far as I can see. Well, if that's all it is, there are better ways of making those glasses important from a plot perspective than the cleaner's stolen them and is going to blackmail us, which I think is what she tries to convince Ned is going to happen. Yeah. She could plant them in Ned's office. She's in there often enough. And Ned then says, well, I can't say. He already suspects her. He already knows that she's up to something by this point, by the time the glasses become an issue. Because it's Ted Danson who says there were no glasses. Where were his glasses? He wore them all the time.
Yeah.
Why would he go to the boathouse or whatever it is? Not the boathouse, is it? Why did he go to this warehouse? Not wear his glasses. Not wear his glasses. So then he thinks, where the hell are they then? So he goes to her and says, you need to start thinking very seriously where these glasses are and what's to do. So if he then finds them in his drawer in his office, he's going to say, well, what do I do with these now? Because I know she's planted them, but I can't say that without implicating myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then it becomes an issue. Then it becomes a good plot point, you know. So what does he do with these glasses? And then if he's seen holding them by that secretary who doesn't do anything but keeps giving him phone messages because his phone's off the hook, then she becomes a witness. Then he's really in trouble. So I think it's one of those things. It's what I call a first draft problem. You know, you think, I need evidence against him. Well, it's the glasses. That's a clue for Ted Danson, and it's incriminating Ned. And she can bob it off on a cleaner. But in second or third draft, you say, what cleaner? I either have to produce one and show one, but then I'll have to explain why she doesn't say, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't take any glasses. What are you on about? So do I have to kill her then? Then it all starts to get too complicated.
Yes.
You know, so it strikes me as a first draft issue, that's not been picked up or not been properly polished before it was shot, you know, and it happens. It happens. But for such an important plot device, that really is the trap that Ned falls into, it needs to be sharper than this.
Yes. That's my big problem. Is just none of it is sharp enough. It's all very basic, and I just kept saying that the whole time I was watching the movie. This is so basic. This is so basic. Oh my god, you can't be this. Okay, you are this basic, and it was frustrating. It was really, really frustrating because I was hoping for something just a little bit more, something a little bit more richness to it, and you know. It's a shame for me. It was a shame that it didn't really go beyond the surface of what the opening scenes present, because it really just sort of is in many ways just one note. Like the opening scenes are the note, and it never changes for that. There's no sort of ups and downs. It's just full throttle. Here you go. Crank to 11 of sexual tension, and then some murder at the end.
There's another slight problem with this, which is that we're meant to, when the final twist comes, we're meant to marvel at how clever Kathleen Turner has been, because she's duped everybody.
Yeah.
But the glasses point shows that she's not that clever at all. If anything, she's lucky.
Yes.
She's lucky she gets away with it, you know. Yeah. And that's a lot more diluted than, you know, a femme fatale who has plotted everything so intricately and brilliantly that she's able, without any fear of repercussion, to take the money and walk away and say there's nothing any of you can do about it. You know, it's luck that she gets away with this. You know?
No, I didn't like that. I didn't like it all. I didn't like the ending scene of her on some beach with some other guy, and they also missed a trick with the ending scene, because the very first scene of Maddie and Ned says something along the lines like, "Don't talk about the weather," right?
Yeah, he does. Yeah,
and then she's on this beach, and I really expected the guy that she was with to say something about the weather, and her say, "Don't talk to me about the weather." Like that would have been that would have been a really nice ending. To that scene, if even just like that little sort of twist even there, but it's like, oh, you've missed something. Come on.
I mean, he does say something about the weather. He says it's hot, doesn't he?
Yeah.
She just says,
and she needs to say, "Don't talk about the weather." That's what she needs to say.
But she actually says, "Yes, it is."
Yeah.
Which is a bit of a in it, you know.
Yeah. Like,
I again looking back on it 35 years ago, that is brilliant, that. But looking at it since, over the last couple of months and in readiness for this, the problem I have with it now is this. Forget the stupid plot points we just talked about and the glasses and all that, but the twist belongs, in my view, more in an Agatha Christie than it does in a noir. Do you know what I mean?
I see what you're saying.
It's a bit too sort of contrived, you know, for me in a way. And I think if this were Poirot in the drawing room saying, "But of course, you are not you, and the corpse isn't who we thought it was. It's this person here. It's you, and this was your plot." Then I'd be saying, "God, this is good. This is good." I don't get that this is a classic noir ending for me. I know that Ned is a patsy, and he ends up in the position pretty much of all similar types. But for the reasons we've said, I don't feel sorry for him, and I should. I really should be saying, my God, the poor like. I sort of feel that for Walter Neff at the end of Double Indemnity.
Yeah,
you know, and I feel it when the PI is cheated, and left holding the wrap, and taking the wrap or holding the baby, whatever the phrase is. But I just think Ned deserves everything he gets.
yeah. I think that is a big problem with this movie, and that is you don't care about anyone, and there's no one to root for, even if they're.
I care about Ted Danson. I care about Ted Danson.
Yeah, but he's not a main character, though, is he? He's just there. In the
No.
So it's like, your two pro tags. I don't care about Kathleen Turner's character. I don't care about William Hurt's character. I don't care if they win or lose. I just want this movie to end. And you need to be rooting for someone, even if they are a morally ambiguous person, and that's your you like Glass Key or whatever. Like, you need to be able to root and feel something for something and for someone, even if it's like, well, The Last Seduction, where it's kind of cool that Bridget, Gregory gets away in the end.
Yeah,
you're cool with that. Whereas like here, it's like,
Yeah, you are on Bridget's side, though, aren't you? And as we talked about a couple of episodes ago, you're definitely on Frank Carter's side. Well, I am, even though I wouldn't want to meet him. And I don't really have sympathy for him in the sense of who he is and what he does. But I do want him to find the truth.
Yeah.
About what happened to his niece. Or his niece.
His brother.
His brother. And also the niece by extension, I suppose.
Yeah.
But you're here, I just think, well, Matty's lucky and Ned's a dope. So
exactly.
So what?
Body heat, everybody. So what? New poster, body heat.
Yeah. This is definitely style over substance, because when you peel back its layers, you do sort of say to yourself, what was it all for? Having said that, I don't dislike, I do enjoy it. I enjoy watching it and just letting it sort of
fair enough
be what it is, be what it is. But I said at the outset, and I'll repeat it now, towards the end of the episode, nostalgia plays a big part in this for me. It was one of the first things I saw that was noirish, and I was just getting into noir at the time.
So on that note, then, what would you rate? So let's do the rating then. So, we rate all of our films out of 5 Falcons, 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. What would you give Body Heat?
Right. I'm going to be more generous than you, I think. Because I'm going to give it a Falcon at least. So I'm going to say this. I'm going to say I give it 2.5. Right?
Okay.
But I then give it another half for Ted Danson alone. So that's 3. And I'm going to give it a half for nostalgia. So I'm giving it 3.5.
Jeez. God. My generosity is to say that it's a 2. It's a 2 Falcon film, in that visually it looks really great. There's some interesting things they did behind the scenes that I applaud. Casting is really good, acting is really good, but that story is such a mess that it's just I can't go any higher than a 2.
There we go. Sometimes I like watching flawed messes.
I do too, but this one just honestly, I found I looked at the time on it. I clicked the time to see how much was left, and I'd only watched 20 minutes, and I was like, that's not a good sign. If I'm 20 minutes in and I'm looking to see how much is left, that's not a good sign.
I felt like that about V.I. Wachowski. Or Wachowski, whatever it
is. Yes. Whereas I didn't. Well, I loved watching the mess of that. So this is your V.I. Wachowski.
No, I'll tell you what. Well, out of the 2 Kathleen Turner films we've done, we approach one one way and two the complete reverse. So that's life is all about balance, Luke, and we'll call that a balance.
Yes. Well, this is Kathleen Turner's third appearance on our show. Roger Rabbit, VI.
Oh yeah, Roger Rabbit, of course.
So I guess you would recommend people go find Body Heat if they've not seen it and watch it then.
I would recommend people watch it. But I would say watch it as objectively as you can, remembering that it was 1981 and not 2024.
Yeah, I would, despite my negativity, I would say give it a watch because you might like it more than I did, and there are interesting aspects to it. So
yeah, this is all opinion. This is all opinion, and
it's just that my opinion is right.
Apart from when it's wrong.
Apart from when it's wrong.
But this is all opinion, and the fact of the matter is, if you don't want to tax your brain too much worrying about the things that we worry about by necessity on this show, like plotting devices and internal logic and all that business, you'll pass 2 hours quite easily with this if you can just accept that it's dated and there's a lot of Kathleen Turner and William Hurt's behinds, and fronts.
But mostly Kathleen Turner's fronts.
But mostly Kathleen Turner's. Well, that wraps up our investigation. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week with another case. In the meantime, please like and subscribe, and be sure to take care walking down those mean streets.